There are millions of people out there that are trying to fix their posture or have tried in the past and aren't getting anywhere. And that's because they're overlooking this one key thing that drives our posture. When people try to fix their posture, they oftentimes overly fixate on muscles. Certain muscles being too tight, other ones being underactive, and trying to then stretch or strengthen certain muscles. But they're not asking themselves, why are those muscles tight in the first place to even begin with? It's not like your body just woke up one day and decided it wanted to tighten up certain muscles and loosen other ones. It's doing that for a specific reason, and that reason is our center of gravity. When I refer to our center of gravity, I'm referring to how different joints are aligned within our body and our posture to stack our weight over our foot and where our weight is over our foot relative to that. Take a look at all of these different postures. All of them have exactly one thing in common. They're adjusting the position of the legs, the pelvis, the rib cage, and the head in order to keep, and in an attempt to keep, an even center of gravity down the midline of the body running through the midfoot. If, for example, my pelvis was more in a forwardly tilted position, then I'm going to feel like maybe I'm just subconsciously falling forward. So I'm going to need to then have something above this come back, maybe like my upper back, in order to keep balance. This is mostly a subconscious thing that you aren't even really aware of, and it builds over time. Now you may be wondering, well, how does this even happen in the first place? Why did that pelvis even move forward to begin with? Well, over time, as we progress through life, we tend to become a little bit more sedentary. We tend to move less, and we tend to move in the same repetitive patterns when we do move. So we tend to lose movement options and variability. Let's say, for example, over time, your body lost the ability to access internal rotation of the hip. This is very common, especially with people that sit a lot, because this is a position of hip bend. So the body adapts to that hip bend, and it then stays in relatively a position of hip flexion or hip bend when they fully stand up. So they lose the ability to extend their hip, and extending the hip requires internal rotation. Now, that's just one way you could lose internal rotation, but let's just stick with this example. If you don't have the ability to internally rotate your hips, then dumping your pelvis forward into an anterior tilt will help push the femur back within the hip socket, and that will help you access compensatory internal rotation. Again, not necessarily a huge problem, but that posture and pelvis position could be representing certain movement limitations, and if you don't have the ability to access genuine movement, then that could potentially be problematic. So if you were then stuck in that forwardly tilted position of the pelvis, you would feel stuff on the front side of your body feel tight potentially, or you'd feel like your low back is tight because your low back is in a compressed position. You might feel like your abs are elongated or weak or whatever, the common stuff you see all the time. This is just an example, but it's trying to illustrate how the muscles aren't the issue. It's that the center of gravity here is being pushed forward. Just stand up, have a neutral stance with your feet straight ahead, hip width apart. Now just feel your weight evenly distributed from the front of your foot all the way to the back, even 50-50 split. Then what I want you to do is lean forward onto your toes, and notice how once you get more on your toes, your back starts to contract because it's trying to pull you back from not falling too far forward. Okay. Now I want you to do it again, and notice what happens to your calves. Your calves start to contract too to help pull you back. Now what I want you to do is I want you to do this right here. If you had more of this presentation, which we're obviously exaggerating, you start to feel a little bit more here because this is gripping to not have you fall too far under yourself. So what we would then want to do is re-educate our center of gravity to then come back and move relatively onto our rear foot, the back of our foot, rather than being pushed forward onto our forefoot. And then the muscles will let go because they're not trying to hold us in that position for fear of falling forward. And then you might see your mobility start to come back because your body can access a neutral position. It's not being stuck in one position. This is why I like to start a lot of my clients with simple table tests, because it represents the ability for that system to get into a neutral position. If someone is limited in, let's say, shoulder internal rotation, that's telling me that they're forward and they have tight chest muscles, but that might not be because their chest muscles just want to be tight. It might be because their sternum is depressed because they're rounded in their back in an attempt to balance their center of gravity and their center of mass over their foot. So this becomes tight and they get held in that position and they can't internally rotate anymore. But if I can get them to shift back, now all of a sudden If this can open up, this can drop a lot more easily. So the goal would be to learn to stack the head over the rib cage, over the pelvis, over the midfoot, and be able to access that position. I don't need you to be stuck there or in that position at all times. I just need you to be able to get there. I don't care about one particular posture. I care about being able to access a lot of different ones in a lot of different positions. But being able to access a relatively neutral position is important because neutrality is sort of a starting point, not an end destination. Being able to access neutral means you can then move from neutral to other positions and then back to neutral again. That's key. But when you're stuck in a certain potentially quote unquote bad posture, you're not able to access that neutrality, and you're going to find substitutions to fill in gaps of range of motion or movement deficits because you can't get in other positions effectively without compensation. If you have a pelvis that's tilted more forward like this and you have a big back arch curve, then that means your center of gravity is being pushed forward within your lower body in all likelihood. So we want to learn to bring that back. What's really interesting is that you can have the opposite pelvis presentation where it's dumped under you like this, but still this is dumping your weight forward and under you. So your weight would still be actually moving relatively forward within your foot relative to your pelvis. So what we want to do is still bring this back and stack this better over the midfoot. And a really good way I like to start to educate a better stack of these structures of the head over the rib cage over the pelvis is with a wall supported drill like this. If this approach is making sense to you and you finally want to try something besides just stretching and strengthening muscles, then check out my beginner body restoration program. It's designed for anyone to be able to do, and you can individualize it to your own imbalances and asymmetries even. It doesn't take up much of your time and it doesn't require a lot of special tools. So if you want to learn more, check out the link down below in the description. This is the wall supported reach with the ball hold. We're gonna start with an object in between our knees that's a little bit compressible that allows our knees to stay in line with our toes. So it's not too large, shoving our knees out. It's not too small, making our knees collapse in. We're gonna place it in between the mid part of our thigh there. Now, we're gonna get 1 foot length away from the wall. So take one step, place your heel in line with your toes of that back leg, and now get a toes straight ahead, hip width stance. Now we're gonna make sure that our head is stacked over our rib cage and our pelvis. So we want a lot of our back touching the wall with our head nice and relaxed, our gaze looking straight ahead. And then what we're going to do is feel the foot contacts of the inner heel and the first metatarsal head on both sides evenly. That doesn't mean we lose the outside foot and roll off of it. That just means that's where our focus is on both sides evenly. Our bias is there. Now, feeling on the wall, the most important contact of our low back is our PSIS. Those are those kind of bony spots at the backside of our pelvis. We'll put up an image to show you where that is. So Trevor's gonna be focusing on those foot contacts, and on the wall, the PSIS evenly on both sides relative to what he's capable of doing. Now he's gonna place his hands on a chair, ideally something that he can kind of roll or push, and he's just gonna reach it away from him, not letting his sternum depress. So he's gonna stay, again, nice and tall and stacked. So he's just gonna reach that slightly away. That's gonna give him some protraction of the shoulder. His shoulder blade is gonna move away from his spine, but he's gonna remain tall. Now all he's gonna do is breathe in through his nose, silently, out through his mouth, sighing the air out. For about 5 to 8 seconds of an exhale. At the end of that exhale, he might feel a little side abs engaged, not six-pack abs, but side abs. He's going to maintain a slight contraction in those side abs as he silently, super slowly inhales through his nose, and that's going to give him some nice opening of the backside of his rib cage, and he should feel some expansion back there. All the while, remember, don't lose that PSIS on the wall on either side. Don't lose those foot contacts on either side. The biggest thing to watch out for here is people have the tendency to clench their lower glutes. We do not want that to happen. We are trying to stay as relaxed as possible. So please check in with yourself and ask, are my glutes relaxed? And if not, then what you can do is give that ball a little squeeze, maybe a 3 or 4 out of 10, not much more than that, before you try to find your PSIS contact and those foot contacts. So squeeze, then go, and that should make it easier for you to keep your glutes relaxed. Another very common thing I see is the rounded shoulders, forward head presentation. Now, either one of these postures can be associated with a forward head posture. If you have a forward pelvis and your center of gravity is being pushed forward here, you may need to then round that upper back a lot to help push this back, but then your head goes forward. So if you have that, check out this video. It has one of my favorite all-time exercises for addressing that, which would work for either of these presentations. The other thing you may be wondering is, well, then what about asymmetries and side-to-side center of gravity issues? Well, that's exactly it. It is, again, just a center of gravity issue. Let's say I'm pushed over to my left side like this, and I had a left hip that was higher, and I would have a right hip that's lower. Well, in this case right here, I would have a center of gravity that's shifted over to my left. So I would then want to do exercises that help me better push my center of gravity to the right and accept that load within my right side. And I have a great full tutorial for understanding exactly these limitations in this video right here. You can check that out down below in the description. But I really want to show you guys with this video that it's not about tight muscles. It's about center of gravity control. And you'll see that as you start to get better at this stuff and you understand where your center of gravity is, muscles typically let go.